Good morning. This is part 2 of a course on global finance. In this part 2, I will be looking at the question, is Canadian urbanizations within different provinces creating actually regional inequality? What I mean by that is it that some cities in different provinces is growing at an exponential speed that it's affecting the other provinces because youth will be moving between one city to another city. And if they move from provinces that have less opportunity for them, it actually creates a higher degree of innovation in bigger cities. My name is MailletteGlobal. I am a PhD candidate with the International School of Management, and this course is Global Economic Part 2. Documentations were provided, in particular a document written by McKinsey and Company that was published in January 2015. Not only am I looking at urbanization in the country, I'm also looking at global growth. It's been known that youth mobility right now is actually quite prominent because of human mobility from one country to another, either because of war or because of economic downfall, or actually people looking for better environment for innovation. The paper was written about, can productivity save the day in an aging world? We all know that we have an upside down demographic graph right now, where there are much more elderly people in countries, and that is actually will be affecting the economy of different countries in the near future. So by doing that, we found that elder people also seems to gather into urban area because it is easier for them. But they also say in their report that because of that, cities have to plan for long-term benefits if they want to not only keep elderly people, but to actually promote the welcoming of youth. One of the benefits that they found also is in a larger city, energy consumption is far less than probably rural areas. Obviously, there is smaller places to live in which cost less to heat. A group of people lower the tariff or the amount of money you have to pay for energy consumption. So that is all beneficial to urban area, which is opposite to rural area, where you have larger house to heat or to maintain, which costs a little bit more for energy consumption. Also, what they mention is that there is, they found that there is a gap between the income of the rich and the income of the poor in urban area or within country. And this is caused mostly by stagnant medium incomes that would have come from technology. We have witnessed in the last 10 years, especially in manufacturing sectors, many employment being replaced by robotics. Hence, the younger people would have to learn new ways to deal with the technology, so they will have to become far more creative and far more innovative using the new technology so they can compete with each other. That is actually going to affect the urban area. My interest is obviously in Canada, so I looked, is it true that there is an income stagnation in Canada? And what I found is actually in Canada, not so. If we look at Statistics Canada, we can see that in the last 5 years there has been in the medium income a steady growth from 7.2 to $72,000 Canadian a year to almost $81,000 a year. But that's in Canada. But if I go to different provinces, the growth is not as prominent as or steady as what the medium income in Canada is. I in particularly look at an analysis of the curve or the variance, the kurtosis and the skewness of each province. I applied the data that I've received from Statistic Canada and enter it into a statistical analysis. And what I found is that when you look at the kurtosis of the curve, which is means that there would be a flatter curve with compared also with the standard deviations, we found that actually, yes, in some provinces, in particular Quebec and in Nova Scotia, the variance and PEI, which are both Nova Scotia and PEI are maritime provinces, Quebec is central provinces. So it looks like the variance is very, very small. The standard deviation is also far less than the other provinces. And the kurtosis, which means that the tail end, the probability of the tail end is on the negative side, which means that the median is actually behind the mean. So looking at that with different provinces, we can see, yes, indeed, there would be a stagnation of income growth, but also because of the skewness and the kurtosis, it's a possibility that there is a larger gap between the high income earners and the low income earners. What I look is Nunavut is actually one of the most progressive territory that we have right now. And the Statistic Canada looked at the First Nation women living off reserve and compare them with the women living on reserve. So by keeping a same grouping of people, like the same culture, same background, to see what is the difference between within the same group, what would be the difference between these people. And what they found is that the people that lives off reserve appears to have a higher level of post-secondary credential than the people living on reserve. I must say that in Canada, reserve are generally in rural area and are situated in very difficult places to go to. So I wouldn't be surprised. I am actually not surprised that the women on reserve are far less education or capacity to actually grow into the financial system than First Nation women who are living in urban area. Just for the fact of opportunity and availability of education. Another documentation that could show why the competition between the urban areas within the different provinces can actually affect each provinces is with Michael Porter's document, Competitive Advantage of Nations, that was written in 1990. He actually mentions that the benefits of having domestic rivals is important because people compete with each other, new idea comes, new innovation comes. And he put this in what they call the diamond of national advantages. I would call it the diamond of provincial advantages, which means that you have, each province have different strategy, structures, and rivalry. They have different availability of resources and availability of skills. Also, they also have different demand conditions. Provinces that are more populated will have more demands on very specific supply. So there's more competitiveness with the supplier. And this is what I look with the urban area, like in urban area, between different urban areas and different provinces, which one has a higher advantage than urban area in other provinces. Hence, earlier in my chart, when I look at Quebec, Nova Scotia, and PEI, the demand from those provinces are highly different than the demand from the other Canadian provinces. Not obviously because of the amount of population within those provinces, but also because of the type of demands that is associated with each provinces. Then we look at the anatomy of an inclusive growth in Europe, which means that each part of Europe should be included for the economic growth. That was written by Dar, Vass, and Wolf in 2016. So what they say is unemployment is much higher in a number of states, which is what I found in Canada. Unemployment in different provinces, in different urban areas is higher in different areas. Intergenerational divide between the young and the old is wide, and it is true. We found that there's a lot less youth in different urban area than there are older people, which means that the social mobility of the youth is very, very weak. And that's what I found also in certain urban area. Now, what they say is poverty appears on the mean side of the statistic appears to be lower. However, when they look at Europe, they say country by country income is not equal. And it has, inequality has increased in the last few years. So I took this information and I applied it to Canadian cities. And from 2001 to 2016, and what I found is, yes, there were more youth in growth. I look at the unemployment rate at this time, and there was more unemployment rate in St. John's, Newfoundland, than actually there was in Edmonton in 2001. But let's not forget, this is the time of the oil production. But this is today, when we look at it, we have more or less this, some cities have changed. St. John, New Brunswick has not changed. St. John's, New Brunswick has not changed. The one area that seems to be stable is Quebec. Guelph. There's not much change also in Sherbrooke, Quebec. So the province of Quebec seems to maintain a stable economic employment for youth. Okay, they don't seem to be unemployed as much as some of the other provinces. I found an article, July 19 or 2016, from Bloomberg News, especially the Financial Post, and what they were talking about is that the youth employment in Canada is very low. The unemployment rate is 55.2%. Mind you, we're talking about a group of young people from the age of 15 to 24, which usually is their activities are in education. We're talking here about part-time employment. However, the part-time employment is the part-time unemployment is extremely high, which means that these young people will have less capacity and capability to complete higher education, because many of them will be independent, especially after the age of 20, and will attempt to part-time work and pay for education. And the education is getting more and more expensive in Canada. Hence, because you have an unemployment rate of 55.2% in Canada, that means that youth either have to live home and go to university, which is at proximity of home, or they do have to work. They have no choice but to find employment. And that's the only way that they could get a degree or a certification that will allow them to get a well-paid job. Now, this is more difficult for younger people right now than it is for people older than 24 years old. I look at New Brunswick, which is the earlier slide showed that there was a problem with social mobility, income stagnation, youth problem, and what a newspaper showed in New Brunswick that was written by Daniel McCarty on March 22nd, 2016. He said New Brunswick has the highest level of unemployment in Canada, and that highest level of employment is made of majority by students, which means that these students are incapable of completing their degrees or certification. There's no new demands for part-time student-oriented type of job, which means that these young people have actually no type of income or no prospect to be capable of being employed in the near future. That is also affecting the urban cities, like the urbanization of cities, which means that these young people living in New Brunswick or PEI or other places where there's a stagnations of income will actually be moving to other cities in Canada, in particular Toronto, possibly Montreal, Vancouver, where the possibility of finding part-time job is much higher, which means that Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, and possibly Edmonton has a better chance to grow economically and exponentially than any other cities in Canada. One thing that is also affecting the unemployment is probably because the youth growth in Canada had gone down in every single cities, in every single province since 2001. We can see that the curve is actually dwindling down to less than 100,000 youth in most of the city. The city that have the most youth is obviously Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary. The rest are losing their youth. So there's a good chance that in the future the other cities will actually be losing economic growth against these four larger urban areas. I also looked at the youth, comparing it to the unemployment from different section or different era. I looked between the youth growth between 2001 to 2005, also compared to the unemployment growth 2001-2005, the youth growth 2005-2011, and the unemployment growth 2005-2011. And the youth growth 2011-2016, and the unemployment growth 2011-2016. Now, when you look at the graph, 2011-2016, which is the last 5 years, there is a marked unemployment growth in Calgary, Edmonton, part of Winnipeg, Regina, St. John's, which is Newfoundland, okay, while the other ones have an unemployment, lower unemployment, which obviously are the big cities like Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary. But what's interesting to know is the unemployment growth is not necessarily attributed to the youth in Calgary, Edmonton, Winnipeg, and Regina, because the rate of the growth for youth in those cities is actually growing. So it's not because you have more youth that you will have more unemployment. There are other factors that should be considered. If you have a youth, there's should be some form of help or some form of policies that would actually help them for getting more student part-time jobs. And that comes from documents that I read, which is called the EDIE document. It's called the Ecosystem for Innovation. In each city, they should look at exchange of talents and insights for individuals to transfer. So that means that youth should be able to develop their own skills and be able to transfer. It's like job transfer, job mobility within the same city. It would have to get some policies to overcome career barriers, and that has numerous factors in it. Could be from being language, not being able to express yourself fully in English or in French, depending on where you are. Also education, which is a big one. And also to look at leverage personal strength. So by looking at each youth capacity to develop, and each and every one of them have very special skills that they should be able to develop, so they would be able to innovate and create within the cities that they are in, which means that you need investors to adapt to these new concepts. Investors at this present time in Canada are generally in the age range of 60 and over, because they are the ones who are retiring with investments. Convincing people who have been on the work market for a long time that certain innovation should be invested in is more difficult for youth to do, because we have a group of people who are actually risk averse. When you end up with being 60 and over, you don't want to lose your pension, or you don't want to lose your investment. So for these people to adapt to new ideas and new investment may be a little bit more difficult. Now, one thing that the investors also are part is that because they are at pension level, the cycles of innovation that is happening may be happening a little bit too fast for the majority of pensioners, because they're not within the work market anymore. So they're sort of separate from what actually is happening within the economy of the country. They benefits from it, there's no doubt about it. However, the benefits, the fact that they are retired and not knowledgeable enough of what's happening into the work and into the market development in innovation and creativity, is probably an hindrance to youth to be capable of getting enough investors to develop their own idea. So in conclusion, I do agree that less youth in smaller urban areas appear to increase unemployment rate because of the demand on them, and may not be what they can provide, and there's not enough demand for those smaller areas. There's not enough supplier for them to develop their own innovation, and they probably don't have as much opportunities than if you go into the bigger center like Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Edmonton. So between provinces, yes, there is an increase of regional inequality. To counter that, the implementation of some of the DIE concept between rural and urban should reduce the wage gap between the two conditions, and promote youth innovation. I'm saying that by changing the policies and telling people, or changing some policies saying investment into new concept should be reinforced through the banking system, through the government, might help keep the youth in their own province instead of moving between provinces. Okay, this is the conclusion for Global Economic. If you have any questions, well, you're welcome to write to me. Thank you.